Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Publishing Your Bioethics Education Research, the third in a series of webinars developed by Bioethics Education Resources, or BEdR, a project of the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education's USA Working Group. The series is produced in partnership with Cambridge University Press and Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine. I'm Amy Michelle Debates from OUWB School of Medicine, and I'm one of your co-hosts today, along with Dr. Claire Clark from the University of Kentucky College of Medicine. Dr. Clark and I are co-directors of the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education's USA Working Group, and we are pleased to be able to bring this webinar series to you. If you have questions at any time during the webinar, please feel free to use the chat function in the lower right corner of your screen. We will have time for the presenters to answer questions at the end of the webinar presentation, and we welcome any additional questions that you have after the webinar as well. Dr. Clark will now say a bit about the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education and Bioethics Education Resources.
The Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education is a product of the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics and Cambridge University Press. The consortium is composed of international working groups of educators who teach medical ethics, humanities, and the arts. Bioethics Education Resources, or BEdR, is a project of the USA Working Group.
We would like to invite you to consider attending the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education's annual meeting for 2019. The meeting brings together scholar educators in bioethics, humanities, and the arts and health professions education from all over the world, and we meet to share promising practices and cutting-edge research in bioethics education. The meeting takes place in Paris in early July at Reed Hall, which is part of the Columbia University Global Center campus in scenic Montparnasse. The call for papers is currently available, and we hope to see you there.
The mission of the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education Working Group is to develop and promote standards and best practices in ethics, humanities, and the arts education and the health professions, and to equip educators from varied disciplinary backgrounds and expertise with the resources and training for a scholarly approach to teaching ethics, humanities, and the arts and health professions, and to make contributions to the scholarship of teaching and learning. BEdR currently consists of two central initiatives housed online at bedr.education, and those are, first, an open access collection of peer-reviewed teaching resources that have cross-institutional promise, published in partnership with Florida International University, and second, a webinar series, of which this webinar is a part, for ethics, humanities, and the arts educators teaching in professional settings, which is published in partnership with Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine.
This webinar is the third in our series on bioethics education research this year, and we welcome you to participate in all of our webinars. The previous webinars, Getting Started and Methods in Bioethics Education Research, are archived online. Participants will be emailed a link to the webinar archive site for future reference. Our upcoming webinars will be taking place in February and April, and these will focus on funding and collaboration respectively. I now have the privilege of introducing our presenter for today's webinar. Our presenter is Dr. Maren Gillis, who is professor and chief of the Division of Ethics, Humanities, and the Arts at Florida International University College of Medicine. Dr. Gillis is also the founding director of the USA Working Group of the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education. Dr. Gillis's presentation is supported by Dr. Melissa Ward-Peterson, who is a postdoctoral associate in the Department of Epidemiology at the Florida International University Stempo College of Public Health and Social Work, as well as Dr. Carlo Lupi, who is Associate Dean for Evaluation and Assessment at Kaiser Permanente College of Medicine. Welcome, Dr. Gillis, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Debates and Dr. Clark, and welcome everyone to the third webinar in the BEdR webinar series, Publishing Your Bioethics Education Research. My name is Dr. Maren Gillis, and I'd like to join my colleagues in welcoming you today to help meet a challenge many of us as educators face: publishing. In my capacity as Division Chief and Director of Faculty Advancement for the largest department at our medical school that includes the Division of Ethics, Humanities, Arts, and Design, the Division of Family Medicine, the Division of Internal Medicine, the Division of Community Medicine and Research, and last but not least, the Medical Library, I find myself mentoring faculty from across professional backgrounds towards academic success. I offer today some of what has been helpful to them, but I will focus in particular on information most relevant to those faculty who teach ethics, humanities, and the arts in medical education. By the end of the session today, we hope that you'll be able to describe a scholarly approach to teaching and learning, locate venues for publishing your teaching resources and research, distinguish between analytic and descriptive approaches to educational scholarship, and recall sites for faculty development in the scholarship of teaching and learning in ethics, humanities, and the arts in the health professions. Why we need to address educational scholarship in ethics, humanities, and the arts is not only because there's scant discussion of it in the health and medical professions education literature, and so there's a gap that needs filling. Leaders in academic medicine, including curricular deans and program accreditors, recognize the value and importance of these fields as ends in themselves, in addition to their importance for realizing other standards of medical education. For example, clinical skills and professionalism. They have a place in medical education, and in fact, their place must be demonstrated to accreditors. However, for those of us who are in these fields, we have been less than successful in making the case that teaching in these areas requires specialized training. Sometimes it seems that anyone who has the interest and the time can be called on to teach ethics, for example, at the medical or nursing school. In addition, we have not demonstrated enough how our educational activities align with educational theory. And finally, we have not been that successful publishing best practices and evidence-based research in medical education journals. Our inability to disseminate scholarly approaches to teaching and learning to those who make decisions about the curriculum in the health professions fields is to our detriment. The success of our educational efforts will depend on our ability to translate our work into forms medical educators understand. And these include, but are not limited to, peer-reviewed teaching resources, quantitative, qualitative, and mixed methods educational research, articles in peer-reviewed medical education journals, and grant funding. I want to turn now to speak about faculty as educators and the idea of the scholarship of teaching and learning. The idea that there is something called scholarship of teaching and learning is relatively new in the history of the American Academy. We are all familiar with the holy trinity of academic life: research, teaching, and service. Advancement as faculty is traditionally on the basis of research, and research involves contributing new knowledge to the field in which one holds a terminal degree. So, for someone like me, who is a bioethicist with a PhD in philosophy, traditionally my field would be held to be philosophical bioethics, and I should be presenting and publishing in academic philosophy. Teaching in the traditional model is necessary, but not sufficient for promotion. And I am sure as faculty, you have heard more than once that teaching is just something we all do, and being acknowledged as a good teacher is simply a function of having high approval ratings on student evaluations. While the trinity of research, teaching, and scholarship remains, what counts as research and scholarship has changed a lot. During his tenure as president of the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching during the 80s and 90s, Ernest Boyer challenged the prevailing view of academic research by expanding it into 4 separate domains in his famous work, Scholarship Reconsidered: Priorities of the Professorate. Boyer designated 4 domains of scholarship, including the scholarship of discovery that includes original research that advances knowledge, for example, basic research, the scholarship of integration that involves synthesis of information across disciplines, across topics within a discipline, for example, science communication or interprofessional education. The scholarship of application, also known as the scholarship of engagement, that goes beyond the service duty of a faculty member to those within or outside of the university. And finally, the scholarship of teaching and learning, which is the systematic study of teaching and learning processes. Boyer believed that excellence in the classroom is all too undervalued, and was not necessarily a function of how popular a professor was. The scholarship of teaching and learning, as he saw it, involved planning, assessing, and modifying one's teaching. And teaching and learning as a scholarly activity meant applying to teaching the same exacting standards of evaluation that are used in traditional basic research. Now, taking a scholarly approach to teaching is the first step in the scholarship of teaching and learning, and I underline the word approach. As professors in university, especially at the postgraduate level, we are disseminators of knowledge in our field. We tend to have terminal degrees in the field in which we teach, or at least by LCME standards we should have. We are fluent in the methodologies and keep up to date with the scholarship in our fields. And as educators in our fields, the same rigor of scholarship is expected for this particular activity. What this means is that our educational interventions are systematically designed, they are strategically implemented or managed, they are reflectively evaluated, and we ensure that our work is informed by the literature and the best practice in the field. Teaching at the university and at postgrad, we are at once two professionals, a basic scientist and a medical educator, a humanist or artist and a medical educator, or a clinician and a medical educator. Now, what do we do as professional educators? We teach, and teaching takes many forms. For example, we lecture, facilitate small groups, run labs and simulations, develop problem-based learning cases, team-based learning, case-based learning, and these are just to name a few. We design curriculum, big bits of it, like courses, certificates, or even degree programs, and smaller bits of it, like units or modules. We design assessments to see if our students reach the learning objectives, and we also advise and mentor students as well as colleagues. And finally, we lead and manage in the role, for example, of a course or clerkship director. Now, if you're taking a scholarly approach to designing your teaching interventions, designing your curriculum, and designing your assessments and your rubrics for assessment, you will have something to publish. This move is going from a scholarly approach to teaching and learning to making your own contribution to the scholarship of teaching and learning. In order to contribute to scholarship, to disseminate your work in the field of education, it must be accessible to the educational community, presented in a form that others can build upon, and available to peers for review applying accepted criteria. And a way to start this is to take your teaching, your curriculum, or your assessment products to peer-reviewed conferences to get feedback. After you do this, you rethink, revise, edit, and perhaps submit for publication. Or you could repeat the conference cycle and take it out again, and then publish. For those who do research in the area in which they have their terminal degree, it is the exact same process. But instead of engaging in the scholarship of discovery, it is engagement in the scholarship of teaching and learning. So you may be going to different conferences than you had before. Now, something to consider if you're embarking on the road to the scholarship of teaching and learning in medical education from the humanities is authorship. In the scholarship of discovery in ethics and humanities, single authorship is the norm. And in the arts, scholarship of discovery would be analogous to creating an artistic work, and individual creation is the norm for advancement in this field. However, in the scholarship of teaching and learning in medicine, group authorship is not uncommon. But regardless of what field one comes from at the beginning of a project, one has to manage the ethics of authorship. And there could be an entire webinar on this topic alone. But for now, I want to draw your attention to the issue of where there are multiple authors, there will be issues with the order of the authors. Now, some journals have specific guidelines, and some journals even, for example, limit the number of authors you can have. But regardless, it is always good to refer to the International Committee of Medical Journal Editor Standards. They advise that authorship be based on how much one has contributed to the intervention and design, how much one has contributed to the draft of the manuscript, and further, that anyone designated as an author must give final approval for the manuscript, and each author is responsible for content and conduct too. There was an article published last summer in Academic Medicine on this topic called "Whose Paper Is It Anyway? Authorship Criteria According to Established Scholars in the Health Professions Education." And I suggest that if you're interested that you give this a read. Now, having something that you believe could be published is only the beginning of the publication process. Before you send out your material, you need to consider the following questions so that you can find the correct venue. First, who is your audience? Are they educators in the same field? Are they medical educators generally? Is it an interprofessional audience? What is your goal in publishing this? Are you trying to change an educational practice? Are you trying to start a debate? Are you filling a gap in the literature? And finally, how prestigious a journal are you looking for? Along those lines, you have to ask yourself a serious question, namely, how much rejection can you handle? As we can gather from this tweet, sometimes academic rejection calls for creative resilience. We all sometimes need a happy place to find refuge. Here we find an academic taking refuge in another happy place. Indeed, the publishing process can be anxiety-provoking for those at all stages of an academic career. The adage in academe that we must publish or perish invokes dread. Or perish, I just did a slip. That we must publish or perish invokes dread. And like the person in this cartoon, many of us would take Paris any day of the week. Publish is tied to academic advancement, and one's publishing record helps shape one's academic reputation. But as medical educators, we have options. And if you are already practicing a scholarly approach to teaching and learning, you will already have resources that you could develop for publication. And if you have followed the previous webinars, you will have learned many different ways that you can qualitatively and quantitatively practice research on your educational interventions. Hopefully then, you are on the road to having submissions ready, and it will be simply a question of knowing where to find venues to publish your work. And now with that, I offer you some ideas. I'll describe some publication venues for more traditional research articles, in addition to something you may not already know about, peer-reviewed teaching resource collections. Here are 3 peer-reviewed educational content publication services where you can find lessons, cases for teaching, simulation cases, lab guides, videos, podcasts, assessment tools, and other resources. These collections are not just available for you as publication venues, they can serve as places to start from when you are developing new curriculum and assessment yourself. Publishing your resources in a peer-reviewed collection usually counts towards academic advancement if you are on an educator track. The first resource is BEdR portal. BEdR portal is hosted by the Association of American Medical Colleges, the AAMC. The next is BEdR, Bioethics Education Resources, which is a project of the USA Working Group of the Cambridge Consortium of Bioethics Educators, the very same people who are bringing you this webinar series. And the STFM resource is hosted by the Society for the Teachers of Family Medicine. BEdR portal is recently indexed in PubMed, and it is the most prestigious resource portal in academic medicine. They have resources for dentistry as well as interprofessional health material. And it is possible to get resources in ethics published in BEdR portal. Here are 2 such that I'm familiar with. The first is an ethics questionnaire assignment in the internal medicine clerkship, and the second is a PBL case about publication ethics. And there are ethics and humanities and arts educational teaching resources in the STFM collection as well. But those of us in the field have been frustrated by the quantity and sometimes the kind of materials that are published as ethics and humanities resources. And this need in academic medicine to have more resources in these areas has led to the recent creation of the Bioethics Education Resources Collection, which is the sole venue for free, open-sourced, peer-reviewed teaching resources in ethics, humanities, and the arts, where the peer reviewers are all themselves educators in ethics, humanities, and the arts in the health professions. BEdR will be officially launching in early 2019, and we have submissions in press that are listed on the site, so you can get an idea of the variety of resources that are looked for. I invite you now to explore the feature presentation in BEdR, and hopefully you will be inspired to make your own submission. Notice the top right corner of this slide about what a resource submission includes. All resource collections, including MedEd Portal, BEdR, and the STFM, have something like a submission explanation or an educator guide that explains the context of the intervention. For example, what learners it was used on, and relates educator reflections on the implementation of the resource. In addition to the guide, there will be the actual resources, that is, the teaching materials. For example, the PowerPoint lectures, the case, the grading rubric, reflection exercises designed. Because remember, if you are taking a scholarly approach, designing your teaching interventions, designing your curriculum, and designing your assessments and your rubric for assessments, then you can publish the resources that you've created. Now, the colleagues whom I acknowledged as contributing to this presentation, Dr. Lupi and Dr. Ward-Peterson, offered this distinction when considering the types of articles that are published in education journals, and I have created some charts, and they have created some charts that I will offer you in a few slides. The distinction they draw is between descriptive and analytic types of submissions. Descriptive articles come in two basic kinds. Those that describe an innovation, and it's like saying, this is my great new X, my teaching tool, for example, a course, a longitudinal curriculum, a TBL case or a PBL case, or this is my great new assessment tool. For example, my new objective structured clinical exam, my new multiple choice questions, or my new end of course assessment. Now, a question you may have right now is, what's the difference between this and a resource? Well, journals call for articles like these innovation reports and have guidelines of how to write them up as a manuscript. So what they are is a description of the tools, whereas in the resource collections, you publish the tools themselves with a manual for their use. Descriptive articles also come in the form of a reflection or a perspective article. And question prompts for these types of submission include things like, this is how we did this cool narrative medicine exercise, or we should think more about teaching critical thinking in medicine to help learners deal with uncertainty. Analytic articles, by contrast, offer evidence for the intervention having met some outcome or not, and so the question to answer may include something like, did this intervention have a difference? And possible evidence may include learner surveys of whether the students enjoyed it or what they perceived as the effect on their learning, actual evidence of learning like pre and post surveys or test scores, or some kind of health outcome like well-being or resilience. The other question analytical articles can address is whether the evidence itself for the difference is valid or reliable. An assessment, for example, something like a multiple choice questionnaire in ethics and law, can provide you with consistent results, making it reliable. But unless it is measuring what you are supposed to measure, it is not valid. While these examples are from academic medicine, in the handout there are lists of journals of other health professions, bioethics and medical humanities journals that publish educational pieces, as well as educational journals that sometimes have special editions on health professions education or will publish articles in any field of higher ed. I will now turn to present the list of medical education journals. I will not address all of these submissions, but I am going to comment on a few of them. Let's review some of the venues that publish descriptive articles on innovation. Academic Medicine is the journal of the American Association of Medical Colleges. and is a leading journal in the American context of medical education. And they publish pieces on interprofessional health education as well. An academic medicine innovation report is a description of your great new teaching tool or assessment tool that addresses a challenge facing the wider academic community. The aim is to highlight first steps towards a larger scale solution to a challenge, whether through an innovative pilot or early stage initiative at a single institution, or a preliminary research that defines the challenge and or lays the groundwork for larger scale approaches to the stated problem. Now, challenges that ethics, humanities, and the arts tend to address in MedEd include professionalism, communication, medical decision-making, advanced care planning, end of life, inclusion and diversity issues, cultural humility, cognitive bias, medical history and social history taking, social determinants of health, dealing with uncertainty and ambiguity, and research ethics. So keep this in mind when looking at MedEd journal requirements. Like, for example, in the BMC, which stands for Biomed Central, case reports. Case reports submitted to the BMC MedEd should make a contribution to medical knowledge and must have educational value or highlight the need for a change in clinical practice or diagnostic or prognostication approaches. So you may have a teaching tool that addresses cognitive bias in documenting medical history, for example, and this may be appropriate as a topic for an ethics and humanities educator to contribute. Medical Education is the preeminent journal in the field of education for healthcare professionals and has been recently added to the PubMed Index. They publish review articles. Review articles are sometimes called literature reviews or secondary sources, and they synthesize or analyze research already conducted in primary resources. They generally summarize the current state of research on a given topic. And note that the clinical teacher has a section on faculty development reviews. So often as educators, we concentrate on our teaching efforts with our students, but faculty development itself should be practiced with a scholarly approach. I have not seen such an article, but I could imagine the clinical teacher being interested in an article with a title like this: A Systematic Review of Faculty Development Initiatives Designed to Improve Teaching Effectiveness in Ethics Instruction in Graduate Medical Education. I should make an addition to this list that Medical Teacher has a How We section, which asks authors to describe an idea or topic in medical education that has been implemented. I now turn to descriptive submissions that ask for reflections or opinions. Academic Medicine publishes a section called Perspectives, and in the latest issue, we find one on a humanistic topic entitled Dialogues on the Threshold, Dialogic Learning for Humanism and Justice. And recently, they published a perspective piece that I cannot wait to read called A Philosophical Approach to Addressing Uncertainty in Medical Education. The Clinical Teacher, which is a publication of the Association for the Study of Medical Education, which is based in the UK, although its readership and authorship is international. Oh, special note, they have a call out that may be of interest on healthcare professions and students' well-being. They have a section called Insights, which includes short reflection pieces on topics in clinical education. And they have the Clinical Teacher's Toolbox, which is a very popular collection of tools to enhance learning and teaching and writing about education for, again, those involved with clinical teaching. These are commissioned papers, but if you have an idea for a topic, you are invited to reach out to the editors. Medical Education aims to publish material of the highest quality reflecting worldwide or provocative issues and perspectives. And twice a year they publish a series of short structured reports of about 500 words on lessons learned from innovative teaching interventions called Really Good Stuff. This section is intended as an outlet for the dissemination of descriptions of new ideas in a variety of settings, including curriculum design, teaching practice, and assessment, and attempts at program or curriculum change. Medical Education also publishes a very unique section called When I Say. These brief articles are aimed at clarifying important terminology within the field in a meaningful and entertaining way. These articles start similarly. For example, when I say chief complaint, what I mean is, and this section of the journal has many clinical terms like chief complaint, but they also publish clarification of concepts heard in medical education that could have been contributed by scholars from the arts, humanities, and social sciences. For example, recent clarified terms include equity, resilience, hegemony, phronesis, intersubjectivity, praxis, culture, metacognition, hermeneutic phenomenology, which is something I think many medical educators need to know about, and narrative competence. I also want to draw your attention to a popular section in medical teacher called the 12 tips. I have referred to these many times myself when developing curriculum, as they are usually well written and concise. They address innovations in medical education and the pro tips for implementing them. For example, you can find articles offering 12 tips for teaching the social determinants of health, 12 tips for teaching reflective writing in medical education, and 12 tips for teaching ethics cases in medicine. Perspectives on BEdR is a Dutch journal with an international readership and authorship, and they publish a section called Eye-Openers, which are perspectives on an educational topic, including a critical review of a topic. A recent eye-opener published just in October with a critical view of a topic written by humanities professors in medical education is entitled The Reflective Zombie, Problematizing the Conceptual Framework of Reflection in Medical Education. Turning now to analytical articles, many journals publish research reports or research articles, which are empirical or primary sources and reports on original research. They will typically include sections such as introduction, methods, results, and discussion. I invite the listeners of this webinar to review the second in our series that describes qualitative, quantitative, and mixed methods research for ethics, humanities, and the arts educational interventions in the health professions. But I will go through a couple of titles and publications here, just so that you can get an idea of the range of possibilities. In this recent academic medicine, there is a research article called Art as Sanctuary, a 4-year mixed methods evaluation of a visual arts course addressing uncertainty through reflection that discusses a study done at Columbia University. A recent research report in BMC Medical Education is called Ethical Values in College Education, a mixed methods pilot to assess health sciences students' perceptions. I also noticed that they published recently a research article that shows how pharmacy students can improve access to quality medicines information by editing Wikipedia pages. And we have a colleague who directs the Cambridge Consortium Working Group in England who has used this exact same method for his research ethics students. An example of original research in the medical sciences educator and the medical science educator is designed for basic science professors, usually teaching in the first 2 years of medical school. An example here is design of a platform to discuss ethical considerations of pre-implantation genetic diagnoses, a case for the integration of ethics in foundational science medical curricula, which reports a study of a successful ethics integration in a first-year basic science course. And finally, a short communication you can find in the Medical Science Educator is titled An Analysis of a First-Year Medical Student Comment in a Peer Evaluation of Professionalism. Now, educational supplements and special issues in medical journals show up from time to time. So if you're working specifically as a medical humanist in a specific medical field, you should check out the specialty journal in that field. They may also invite short pieces on education regularly. A few are listed here that have issued education supplements or special issues, including obstetrics and gynecology, contraception, family medicine, the American Journal of Surgery, the Annals of Internal Medicine, and the Journal of the American Medical Association. Now, in the academic journal world, one cannot get access to journal articles unless one has a subscription. University and hospital libraries pay for these subscriptions. A way around this is something called open access publishing. But with open access comes a fee to publish. So the information is free and available to all users who may want to read it, but it requires author funding. However, this fee is due after the peer review process. The BMC journals are all open access, and I believe that Medical Education Online is as well. A unique venue I'd like to draw your attention to has the fastest decision time I've ever seen of a manuscript, around 7 days. It is an online journal called BEdR Publish, and peer review happens after publication. So you're accepted for publication, and then people read it, leave reviews, and they leave star ratings. It is run by AME, which is the Association of Medical Educators of Europe, but it has an international scope. AME maintains a rich resource site called BEdR World that one can get lost in for days, and BEdR Publish is found there. It is open source, free, and they publish descriptive and analytic pieces, for example, on experience of teaching and learning, perspectives, research findings, and assessment in medical and health professions education. A recent article with 5 stars, which is as much money as you can be found in the New Education Method and Tools section entitled Clinical Humanities, Informal Transformative Learning Opportunities where knowledge gained from humanities epistemologies is translated back into clinical practice, supporting the development of professional autonomy and undergraduate dental students. Now, after this quick but dense look at publication venues, which of course is not exhaustive, there are a few things that I want to red flag about academic publishing. There are some challenges to be aware of when looking to get published. First, academic publishing is big business. Content providers aren't paid, the people like us, and universities or authors pay to subscribe. So the companies have an interest in publishing as much as they can. And second, peer review does not necessarily mean blind review. A few rather recent articles speak to these issues and reveal that separating shoddy work from solid work is much more straightforward than distinguishing the top 5% of solid work from the next 5%. Academics are humans and thus susceptible to bias. One of the most powerful biases is status bias. Here, recognition is awarded partly on the basis of past recognition. So this means that a researcher is more likely to get a publication accepted if they have a track record of good publication. Another challenge to be aware of is predatory journals. Librarians have usually chosen journals, so a direct solicitation from a journal as an author or even as a member of a review board is new for academic professors. We're not used to having to make these kinds of discernments. Furthermore, some of these journals deliberately mislead, for example, by declaring bogus impact factors, copying the names of long-standing journals, and misrepresenting the location of the publisher, so it can be difficult for even experienced authors to judge a new journal. Sometimes they even make false statements of who's on their board. Some warning signs are that they all require payment before peer review, and remember that in open access journals, payment is due after peer review. And they are not indexed in major databases. Jeffrey Beal is a librarian from the University of Colorado, and he's been collecting names of bogus journals for years. This is always a good place to check the name of a journal if you are suspect. Now recall what is needed to move from a scholarly approach to teaching and learning to make a contribution to the scholarship of teaching and learning. Namely, that one's work has to be accessible to the educational community, it must be presented in a form that others can build upon, and it must be made available to peers to review applying accepted peer review criteria. A successful process towards publication is to first take your work out to conferences. And so I'm just going to go through a few of these now. In the medical education world, we've got the AAMC conferences, and they have a national and regional meetings through the Group on Educational Affairs. IAMC is the International Association of Medical Science Educators. They meet annually. The Ottawa Conference is an international conference that moves all over the world. It's prestigious, but it's also very expensive because it really goes to a lot of different places. AMI is the European Medical Association, and they have an annual conference, and they move around Europe. And there's also specialty conferences in medicine, for example, the Society for the Teachers of Family Medicine, and they have an annual conference on medical education. There are also ethics, humanities, and health education conferences that support education. The American Association of Bioethics and Humanities now includes education in its annual meeting call, and there is an affinity group for bioethics and humanities educators in the health professions. The Academy for Healthcare Professionalism includes education in its conference call, as does the International Conference on Clinical Ethics and Consultation and the International Health Humanities Consortium Conference. And finally, the only conference I am aware of that is devoted exclusively to ethics, humanities, and the arts in health professions education is the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education, and we meet annually in Paris. I'd also like to draw your attention to an institute that provides exceptional faculty development for educators in the health professions, the Harvard Macy Institute. Both clinical and science educators can be found as scholars, but it is open to educators with a background in ethics, humanities, and the arts. In fact, they have recently added to their 5 course offerings a 6th on arts and medical education. Its aim is to provide scholars with the knowledge base and skills to enhance their expertise in both conducting educational projects of their own design and taking a leadership role in the educational activities at their own institutions. Now, there is a medical education world, and already in the small glimpse of it, you can see it's a pretty big place. One way to keep up with the scholarship is to choose a few medical educational journals and follow them by having their recent table of contents sent to you via email, or if you tweet, via Twitter. This is a quick way to keep up. And here are some examples of journals and how you can sign up. And lastly, thanks to our neighbor in the north, you can get updated on trends in medical education generally by listening to the Key Lime podcasts. Key Lime stands for Key Literature in Medical Education. It is a weekly podcast produced by the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of Canada. It is a quick way to learn the main points of BEdR articles that are important, innovative, or that will make an impact on medical education. I hope you have found this webinar informative and that you are in a better position to take a scholarly approach to teaching and learning ethics, humanities, and the arts in medical education. And if you have been already, I hope that you will immediately after this webinar make a contribution to the scholarship of teaching and learning by submitting some of your own teaching resources to one or all of the resource collections I have mentioned. I thank you for your attention, and I am happy now to take questions. Also, I invite my colleagues from the Bioethics Education Resources to be on standby too, in case you have other pearls to offer our audience as you are accomplished authors in this area yourselves.
We're happy to now take any questions that participants might have. Please feel free to enter them into the chat function so we can answer them effectively. As we're waiting for questions to begin, we'll go ahead and move on to the last couple slides that we have, and you feel free to continue to ask any questions that you have at this time. I'd like to first begin by thanking Dr. Gillis so much for her leadership today and for this webinar. It was incredibly informative, and thank you all for participating in today's webinar. I'd like to again invite you to attend the upcoming annual meeting of the Cambridge Consortium for Bioethics Education in Paris on July 3rd, 4th, and 5th of 2019. The call for papers is currently available through December 31st, and more information on both the call for papers and the meeting itself are available at www.icmbioethics.com. I would also like to remind everyone of the other webinars coming up in this series in February and April of 2019. Pre-registration for those webinars is available by emailing ceme at oakland.edu.
The Cambridge Consortium USA Working Group Executive Directors, that's the three of us, Drs. Gillis, myself, Debates, and Kirchmer, invite your feedback on and contributions to BEdR's 2 initiatives. And we would like to thank Oakland University William Beaumont School of Medicine for hosting this webinar, Dr. Thomasine Kushner, who is co-editor of the Cambridge Quarterly of Healthcare Ethics, and Mark Zadronsky, who is publisher of Cambridge University Press, for their support.
Thank you again for participating in today's webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to send them to us by email or contact us offline. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful day.